A few days ago, I was sitting talking to my daughter and my wife, and we were reminiscing about various things. I picked up a book that I didn't realize I owned. I'd forgotten that I owned it. And it was this. It was an Air Force, a kind of commemorative book from a difficult period in life, which was basic training. I actually see a picture of myself there right above my finger with a bunch of the guys. And I was telling my daughter in particular that one of the benefits of that experience, not only basic training, but the military, was that it exposed me and opened my eyes to the rest of America, not just people with my socioeconomic, religious, cultural, racial background. I met Americans of all stripes and colors, if you'll pardon the pun. And another thought that I had about that was another powerful experience of my life of diversity, of unity, which was working in opera. And one thing that I loved being a guest artist in opera was I would always go to different cities, usually in different countries. And whatever language the opera was, it could have been an Italian opera written about the French court being sung in Italian in an opera house in Germany, and I was the American singer, and my counterpart could have been Swiss, and the next Swedish and German and French and every kind of nationality. And one of the experiences that I had in opera that remains with me of many, for many reasons, was being in Italy and working on the great Strauss opera De Rosenkavalier. It was one of my first professional jobs, and I was in Italy for a few glorious weeks. And Keith Warner was the director. For anybody who knows Keith's work, you know how wonderful he is. And Richard Hickox, the late Richard Hickox, was the conductor. And I befriended him. I liked that maestro, the conductor, a lot. He and his wife and his kids. And when I wasn't on stage, sometimes I'd sit on the edge of the orchestra pit with him during rehearsals and watch him working with the orchestra and watch him working with the soloists on stage. At one point during one of the breaks, I asked him, what happens when you lose us? Because there's so many moving parts. You have the entire orchestra, you have chorus members, you have solo singers, and a lot of moving on stage. And in a Strauss opera, the music's very complex. And so what happens when you lose us, if there are any ever those moments where we're not watching you and we're not all in sync, as clearly you would realize music has to be? And I asked him, do you just make your gestures from the pit much larger, as I expected he would say he would, to gather us back, to pull our attention? And he said, no, I do the opposite. And he said, when I was a student of the great late conductor Pierre Boulle, he taught me, in those moments, instead of making your gestures from the orchestra pit as the conductor larger, make them smaller. See how quickly everyone gets glued into the end of your finger or that baton. I think that's just a powerful, beautiful idea that sometimes we need less to create a greater sense of the importance of a moment or of an event. Sometimes it isn't shouted, it's a whisper. And maybe in the quiet of our lives right now, we're realizing the power of the whisper. And the whisper might be the beauty of nature and the silence in nature right now, other than the birds that I'm noticing like never before. And the lack of the sound of traffic, or even what we used to always hear, the sound of airplanes passing overhead. And the sound of work worrying in our minds constantly, and the sound of, and the sound of, and the sound of. You can fill in the blanks for all the noises in your life, all the distractions, either auditory or mental distractions. And sometimes you have an event like this, as grand but as quiet as this one, that demands that we stop and breathe and ask ourselves the most profound question, what it is simply not to yearn for and not to look back on, but simply to be.